Welcome to Brampton Focus. When you say the words Brampton and provincial politics, in many instances, you talk about auto insurance, you talk about carding, you may even talk about our debt. My name's Michael Charbon. Next, we meet the Deputy Leader of the NDP Party. He's also the representative for Bramalea-Gore-Malton. Jagmeet Singh joins us right here on Brampton Focus. Welcome to Brampton Focus. I'm joined by Mr. Jagmeet Singh. He's a new Democratic Party member for the Provincial Parliament. He's currently the Deputy Leader of the NDP. He's the Vice Chair of the Standing Committee on Social Policy, and he's a critic for the Attorney General and Consumer Services. He was elected in October 2011 and re-elected in 2014. This is his second term in office, and he represents Bramalea-Gore-Malton. Jagmeet, thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
Appreciate you taking your time. You know, Ontario is the most indebted sub-sovereign borrower. We've got $307 billion in debt. We just had a budget. And I think in many instances, I mean, you used to be the finance critic. When you look at the debt that was presented, what are we doing in Ontario? Like, how can we look at such a large debt? And then we look at the Liberals bringing in the debt federally. I mean, are we living in la-la land?
Well, I think one of the main concerns that I have is that we need to be fiscally responsible. But if we look at the way the Liberal government is trying to eradicate the debt, on one hand, they have so much waste and scandal. They've been wasting money on P3s. The Auditor General reported about $9 billion have been spent more than if they would have funded those projects strictly through the government. We look at the gas plant scandal, we look at Orange, we look at eHealth. There's billions and billions of dollars of wasted money that could have gone into infrastructure, that could have gone into resources, and could have gone to reducing the debt. But instead, we have now certain policies that are being brought forward that are actually going to put more of the burden on the people of Brampton, the people of Ontario, which to me is completely unacceptable.
And when you say unacceptable, I mean, it's time to bring some stuff to Brampton. You're talking about hardcore blue-collar workers. I mean, in the federal budget, for instance, gave a lot of money to pensioners, yes. People in Alberta, yes. Aboriginal people, yes. But what about the hard-working guy? What's in this provincial budget that's going to help Brampton?
You know what? Nothing. If you look at the budget, there's going to be cuts to healthcare, there's going to be cuts to education, there's going to be cuts all around to services that people need. Vulnerable people need services, there's going to be cuts. This is an austerity budget, and there's nothing in this budget to prevent or to protect or to help people in Brampton. One of the issues that people bring up, I'm sure you've heard this a lot, in Brampton, we have...
Is it really that bad? I mean,
yeah, it's that bad.
I understand you're the NDP, and, you know, they are the Liberals. I get that. But is it really that bad? There's got to be some kernel of hope. There's no way that as a political party you would vote a budget that doesn't have anything. There's got to be a little bit of sun.
I don't see anything for Brampton. I mean, one of the big issues for Brampton is two of the major issues. If you talk about issues in Brampton, auto insurance is big. There's nothing in this budget to address the fact that we're paying the highest auto insurance premiums in the country, while at the same time the insurance industry is enjoying some of the best record-making profits. So there's nothing to balance that out.
The insurance groups say that dependent on what your postal code is, that there are more accidents. We have a larger concentration in Peel of new immigrants. The driving is not as good. Where you live determines what quality of driver is. So it's not just because Brampton is that. I mean, although it is true that Brampton is like the second highest.
There's actually no evidence to specify Brampton. They have a GTA stat, which says in general GTA costs more, which is fine because GTA, there's more cars.
If you drive downtown in downtown Toronto, it's going to cost you more than if you drive in Barrie. The problem is
that's fine. But the issue is when they distinguish between Brampton, Mississauga, Oakville, downtown Toronto, and Rexdale. Those areas are all very similar. They should be grouped together. They're not. You can have almost 2 times higher premiums just by moving 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers within the GTA. That's unacceptable. And there's no evidence to suggest that you can actually justify that. On top of that, either way, the insurance industry is enjoying record profits. That's a fact.
Yeah, but you could say that about the banks too.
They have the lowest cost they've ever seen in terms of the payouts. Their payouts have gone down dramatically, but our premiums haven't gone down because the government hasn't made this a priority.
So the stats say that Brampton, the average Brampton insurance rate per person is $2,393. That's 44% above the provincial average. Mississauga is $1,998, and that's 26% above the provincial average. So you can see Toronto is even higher than Mississauga, $2,000. You can see that. Another topic when we talk about cars, we talk about some of the fraudulent driving instructors. There's been a huge thing. There's been several mass media projects that have been run on television that talking about these driving schools. How can we attack that? Because that's just adding on to the pile of fire.
Well, listen, there's some wonderful people doing great work when it comes to educating our drivers, but there's some people that aren't. And it's on the government. It's the responsibility of the government to ensure that they have adequate checks and balances to make sure that there aren't these inappropriate schools, these fraudulent schools going on. And what happens is it actually defames all those great schools that are doing good work. Right? When we have these schools that are, not properly regulated, they're not providing proper services.
How do we get together?
The government can crack down on it. The government can ensure that they check.
But it's licensing, right?
It's licensing, it's regulation. It's ensuring that enforcement. That's a big issue. Many of the issues that we see in this province they come down to enforcement. If there aren't the proper enforcement tools in place, there aren't the proper mechanisms in place, you're not going to get the proper enforcement done.
So the provincial budget just brought down with just about a minute and a half left.
Sure.
They said that they're going to create 320,000 jobs. Are we going to see any of those jobs in Brampton?
Well, I'd love to see those jobs in Brampton. We've been asking for this government to ensure that there's a fair budget that actually represents all the people of Ontario, looking at the areas like Brampton, which are hard hit, and we're seeing more and more closures of jobs in the Brampton area. We've recently seen a number of factories that shut down in Brampton. So we want to see that happen in Brampton. The investment needs to happen here. We don't know particulars of that investment when they say there's going to be a 300,000 job increase. We don't know exactly where that's going to be. We will continue to ask questions.
How do we drill down? You brought up a good point, just about a minute here. How do we drill down? How do we hold their feet to the fire? If I'm going to have this kind of a budget and this kind of a debt, I want to see what the results are. How do we hold them to the fire? Just under a minute.
We asked the government to show the evidence. So if they make a promise, we want to see, okay, where are the evidence? Where is the investment going? Show us the correlation between the investment and the jobs. They have to provide that evidence.
And if it's not as good as it's supposed to, what's our recourse? We have to wait 4 years.
Well, the first and foremost thing is we have to raise the issue so that we get the answers. When the answers are available, we let the public know, and the public has the power to make the decision they need to make. But our job is to hold them to account as opposition, show the true facts so that people can make an informed decision.
Jagmeet Singh is with us. We have 2 more segments. He represents Bramalea-Gore-Malton, and he is with the NDP. When we come back, we're going to talk about carding. This is a touchy issue. Had a wonderful scenario where Jagmeet had a huge gathering and had some interesting topics and some interesting conclusions to share with us when we come back on Brampton Focus right here. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Segment 2 of our discussion with Jagmeet Singh, representing the Bramalea-Gore-Malton for the NDP. When we left, we were talking initially about budget, and I said when we came back, we're going to talk about carding. The 2 mayors, Linda Jeffrey and Bonnie Crombie, in Peel say that carding should be eliminated. Our chief, Jennifer Evans, says that she wants to maintain carding. A couple of weeks ago, you had a huge symposium, a lot of important guests, and it was called Carding and the Community, where you brought community leaders together. Tell us a little bit about what happened and what are some of the things that you learned.
Sure. So we had a great list of panelists. We had San Gariwal from the Toronto Star. We had Roger Love from a human rights law group. We had Anthony Morgan from the African Canadian Legal Clinic and Nicole Bonney, who works with the Peel Children Aid Society.
Right.
So basically what we had evidence that was provided that the practice of carding involves stopping people who have no criminal record, who are not involved in any sort of criminal investigation. They're just people walking down the street. There's no specific evidence that links that person to any sort of criminal activity, in the mind of the police at the time when they interact with that person. They don't know anything about the person. They walk up to them.
Can I interject?
But the issue is this. The issue is when they stop these people.
I want to come back to why the police stop them. The police say carding, in many instances, if they go to a high crime area where there's a propensity of drug dealing or criminal activity, those people who are hanging around in that area, they stop and ask them questions. They're not being detained. But because they're in an area of high criminal activity, they want to be able to find out if they're doing anything.
So here's two things. One, in Peel, we have evidence that in a period of about 5 years, there's been 130,000 interactions, and the Peel police were asked to provide us with evidence of how this has ever helped in solving any crime. In fact, carding's gone on for 30 years. The Peel police was only able to provide 5 examples of where this has helped. For 30 years, 5 examples. That's a very poor use of resources. In fact, the evidence shows that proper policing requires evidence-based investigations, leads, tips, some sort of evidentiary basis to investigate a person. If you're stopping people at random, you're wasting resources. It's a waste of money, and it's a poor use of policing. We can do much better. We have the evidence that in Toronto, there's been, since 2008 to 2013, 2 million contact cards were filled out. This is Toronto Star's evidence they were able to obtain from the Toronto Police. Again, 2 million carding interactions. They were unable to provide any substantive evidence to show that it actually helped solve crime. And most importantly, our charter rights protect us from arbitrary detention, which is Section 9 of the Charter, and they protect us from unreasonable search and seizure, Section 8 of the Charter. This infringes the Charter. It's not helpful, it's a bad use of resources, and it's illegal. It violates our Charter. Being stopped with no reason is literally against the Charter.
You said that the practice of police carding and arbitrary street checks have such a negative effect on our communities and disproportionately affects racialized community members. Some would say in the police organizations and would say in criminal investigation that it is a tool for investigation and trying to follow through and connections. It's not necessarily something that you can put a peg on and say that you can make, we solved that crime because we carded this guy. Do you not think that it is hindering a tool that the police are using in the larger scale, the process of going over things and needing to get information?
Well, because I feel even if there was evidence, there's not evidence that it actually helps. But to your point, maybe it's hard to prove that there's evidence. But more importantly, even if there was evidence that it helped, because it violates the Charter, which is the supreme law of Canada, because it has such a negative impact on our society, I think in this time of age, we have enough technology, we have enough creative thinking, we have enough tools at our disposal where we can come up with legal ways to use our resources in an effective manner to investigate crime and stop crime without violating people's rights. I don't think it's an either or. I think we can absolutely come up with investigative techniques which already exist, which don't actually infringe on our rights.
Some people say that the elephant in the room is that we don't want to have race-based statistical information because there are certain communities that would feel that they would be stereotyped, that there would be negative community influences. Do you think race-based stats and collection of criminal statistics would help in understanding either the merits of carding or not?
No, I don't think it actually has anything to do with it because carding is about stopping people that are not actually subject to an investigation. All police investigations should be based on evidence. There's a very strong jurisprudence in courts where everything that's done, you ask, well, did you have reasonable grounds to do it? That should be the hallmark of any sort of police decision.
But the bottom line is if I stop you and I say Happy Sikh Month, which it is Sikh Month.
Yes, it is. Sikh Heritage Month, yeah. Thank you.
If I stopped you, and I mean that, if I stopped you and I was a police officer and I asked you, you have an obligation to show identification.
No, actually. And so in fact, our rights protect us that if you're just walking down the street.
You would be indigent though. If you had no money and no identification, you would be considered indigent, would you not?
No, what happens is the only time you have to identify yourself under the law is when you're driving a vehicle or you're under the Highway Traffic Act. So if you are riding a bicycle, you're driving your car, then by law you have to provide identification. You don't actually have to verbally identify yourself. You can just show your driver's license. If you don't have it, then you would have to verbally identify yourself. But if you're walking down the street, you actually have no obligation under our law to identify yourself.
So high crime areas or general carding takes place.
That's not necessarily true. But what happens is there's two scenarios.
Wait a second. Jagmeet, you can't, a cop walking down the street, Main Street in Brampton, is not just going to arbitrarily stop someone just for the fact of stopping them. All these incidents, and particularly when we have a police chief who's saying that this tool is important, most of carding takes place in high criminal activity areas, high crime areas.
In fact, the evidence actually is that a lot of carding takes place where police believe that someone doesn't fit the description of that community, which is very racist in effect. So they say that if there's a community where they think a certain group of demographic lives and there's someone that doesn't fit that demographic, that's often where they do a lot of carding, which basically suggests that if you don't fit what the community profile is, there's something wrong with you being
investigative, there. I mean, I'm debating with you here because,
for sure.
I mean, I know a lot of police officers and they say, listen, if you're in a particular area and you don't match the particular area, why are you there? Because there has been things that have been done criminally in that area. We're protecting. That goes for all colors and all races.
But it's just such an illogical thing to do. Just because you don't look like you belong there, why would that in any way suggest that you're doing anything criminal, right? That's the fallacy of it. There needs to be evidence. There needs to be some sort of investigative information. There needs to be some sort of link between the time, the place, the geography, the type of offense that happened.
I'm going to say, Jagmeet, that you are almost always right. And I will say we will beg to differ. When we come back, lots more with Jagmeet Singh. He represents Bramalea-Gore-Malton for the NDP Party. You're watching Brampton Focus. My name is Michael A. Charbon. We'll be back with lots more right after this. And welcome back to Brampton Focus. He was elected in 2011, re-elected in 2014. He represents Bramalea-Gore-Malton, Mr. Jagmeet Singh, in our final segment for the NDP. You know, I said in our discussion, we were talking about carding, and I always enjoy talking with you. You're a level-headed guy. I said, Happy Sikh Month, and I threw that in when we really should just address that for a minute. It is Sikh Month, and there's an organization called PAMA, which is Appeal Art and Gallery Museum Archives, and they have a celebration, which is a Sikh Heritage Month all April. That's a huge thing. It's a jewel in Brampton, and I don't know if everybody knows about that, but we should help them know more about it.
Yeah, so PAMA is an amazing museum and art gallery that's right in the heart of Brampton, downtown Brampton. And for the entire month of April, we're going to have amazing exhibits. There's actually world-renowned artists, two sisters, called the Singh twins, and they have an amazing exposition. It's world-renowned. It's some of the best artwork you'll see. It's all at PAMA, so you can check that out for the month. There's also a hallway filled with local artists and Sikh-inspired artwork. There's also a history of the heritage, of the involvement of the Sikh community in Brampton and in Canada. So it's a wonderful event. I encourage everyone to come out and enjoy it.
I think that's important. I wanted to just touch back. We had a spirited discussion in our first segment about budget.
Yes.
And one of the things that we talked about is some of the things that are being sold off. And I want to talk about Hydro One because this really burns me. Hydro One is a moneymaker. I mean, it's roughly earning about $750 million a year for Ontarians. That's paying for our health care, etc. So Hydro One is rated as a huge return between 10 and 11.5%. Now, that's a return that comes to us as Ontario. The utility is going to be sold off, 60% they're talking about. And after paying the utilities debt, somewhere between $3.3 and $3.5 billion are what we're going to get. Like, we're losing. Why are we selling that off?
I mean, just to put it into some basic terms, if you had a company that was earning close to $1 billion a year, would you sell it only to raise $4 billion? And this is something that's going to continually be, it's not like a clothing company that may go up or down. This is electricity. We're always going to need electricity. Yes. It's a guaranteed moneymaker. In fact, the Financial Accountability Officer, independent officer of the Ontario Legislative Assembly, said very clearly, if we sell this off, it puts our province in a worse financial position.
Yes.
You sell things off to put yourself in a better financial position. If you're going to sell something off and someone independently tells you it's going to put you in a worse financial position, you shouldn't do it. It makes no sense to me that the Liberal government is doing this. We've been opposing this decision. We're going to continue to fight it. Already 15% of this precious asset has been sold off. We don't want to see any more of it sold off.
Yeah, they say it's a quick fix. It's a Band-Aid for a slash wound.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great analogy, actually.
Yeah, but you talk about another one. It's the LCBO.
Yep.
Like, there's another money maker. We understand. Why would we burden our future children and our future Ontarians with something that's helping to pay for our lifestyle, our health care, our roads, etc.? How can we stop this? How can we make a move to really stop this from that? Because they're trying to pay for their debt budget. I mean,
you've touched it so beautifully, because it's actually something that really pays for our things we need, like our healthcare, like our education, the infrastructure we need. We need people to get out and tell their MPPs that this is not acceptable. We need people to call their MPP's office, email them. Once people locally start hearing about it, they're going to spread the message up to the Premier and let the Premier know that people are unhappy. If they feel that this is going to hurt them politically, they'll backtrack from it. But people need to make that message loud and clear. Don't sell off our precious asset.
I mean, I think someone said that if we make one bad payment, I think it's something like $90 million a month on our debt, we lose a certain rating with either Standard & Poor's or some of the other rating agencies, and it could negatively affect the province to a huge portion.
Absolutely. This actually takes away our ability to pay down debt. We're actually getting rid of one of the tools that we can use to put us in a better financial position. There's literally no logical reason for this. And it's one of those things that literally burns me as well when I look at it. This is not going to hurt just our generation. This is a decision that's going to hurt, like you said, our children and our children's children. This is a legacy piece of asset generating that we're going to lose.
So 2014-15, the Ontario debt is $307 billion, and we paid $10.7 billion in interest, ladies and gentlemen. That's 4%. That represents 8.2% of our total budget. How do we realize this? I mean, $10 billion just on the interest, and now they want to sell away two of the assets of Ontario that's making payments to help us?
Yeah.
Like we've got to do something, Jagmeet. What's a course of action?
So this is what we've said to the government. The government used to complain that they didn't have a federal partner. Now they say they have a great federal partner who's going to provide funding for infrastructure. The government, the Wynne government, has said that we need to sell Hydro One so we can pay for infrastructure, which makes no sense because it would actually make more sense to keep that asset and use some of that revenue to build infrastructure. So we've said, if you're saying now that you have such a good federal partner, if you're saying that the current government is such a good partner, ask them for the infrastructure funding so that we don't need to sell off our Hydro One asset. That's a very viable solution. Yeah. We've asked this question in Parliament. I've asked that question myself. We've not gotten a proper response to it.
We've got to hold your feet to the fire on this, Jagmeet.
Absolutely.
We can't let this
absolutely
go.
Not.
Tell our folks how they can get in contact with you. I mean, if you ever met a politician who is an expert at social media, Twitter, Facebook, and the best pair of socks that we've had in a guest that's come to Brampton Focus, I might add.
Thank you.
It's Jagmeet. Tell them how they can get in contact.
All right, so I definitely enjoy using social media. So we have Facebook, Jagmeet Singh, my name. We have a website, jagmeetsingh.ca. Twitter, Jagmeet NDP. Instagram, if you're into that, Jagmeet NDP as well. And I'm also on Snapchat, which is recently one of the fastest growing social media platforms. Jug.meet, so JAG.meet.
So with about a minute or so left, is there one particular thing that you want to push through? Is there one particular thing that you want to champion? Because you're a guy that grabs hold of something. You're like a junkyard dog with a piece of meat. You just go for it. Is there something that we can look forward to hearing more about?
Yes, another major issue. We've talked about a bunch of the other initiatives. One major issue that I have is temporary job agencies and people being employed through these agencies and not getting full-time work.
Right.
That's an issue that we can deal with structurally. There's laws that actually make it easier for someone to be hired through an agency. It should be easier to hire someone directly, and that needs to be changed.
All right, I thank you so much. Jagmeet Singh, a representative from Bramalea-Gore-Malton, re-elected twice, strong fellow, strong voice. Support this gentleman, I think, particularly with regards to Hydro One and the LCBO. We thank Jagmeet for joining us. My name is Charbon. You're watching Brampton Focus. Please join us on our Facebook page. You can put forth questions and you can propose further topics for us to discuss. Once again, thank you very much for Jagmeet Singh. Charbon here. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.